I moved into the neighborhood because it was cheap. That was the only reason. A quiet cul-de-sac outside a mid-sized Midwestern city, close enough to the highway to make my commute short, far enough out that no one cared what anyone else did. Most of the houses were single-story brick places from the 70s. Faded shutters, narrow driveways, lawns cut short and kept that way. The kind of street where nothing ever happened, and that was the selling point. I worked nights at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town. 12-hour shifts for nights a week. I slept during the day and lived backward compared to most people. I needed somewhere I could come home at almost 3 in the morning without neighbors staring through their curtains. This place felt perfect. The real estate listing said quiet 3 times. The first week felt dead. Not peaceful, dead. No dogs barking at night. No kids riding bikes during the day. No porch lights switching on or off. No TVs flickering through windows. When I pulled onto the street after work, my headlights passed the same parked cars every night. None moved. None arrived or left. It felt like driving into a photograph. At the end of the cul-de-sac stood a 2-story house, taller than the others. Same brick, but darker, like it had soaked in years of rain. One upstairs window always had a single light on. Warm yellow, not bright, not dim, just there. It never flickered, never shifted. It stayed on through rainstorms and clear nights, through weekends and weekdays. At first, I barely noticed it. Then I started noticing everything about it. I came home at 2:47 a.m. every work night. The light was on. I left for work at 9:12 p.m. The light was already on. On my days off, I stayed up late to keep my schedule. At midnight, it was on. At 5 in the morning, it was on. During the afternoon, when I walked out to take the trash to the curb, it was still on, faint against daylight, but visible. No other house had anything like that. No lamps, no porch lights, no motion lights. Just that one window always glowing. I told myself it was someone elderly who left a light on all the time. A habit, fear of falling in the dark. Dementia, a night light that was brighter than it should be. All of it made sense if I didn't think too long. But I started timing it anyway. I marked the times on my phone, not on purpose at first. Just notes I made to myself when I noticed. The pattern never changed. That light was already on before I left for work, and it stayed on until after I got home. If it ever turned off, it happened when I wasn't looking. One morning, after a long shift, I stood in my driveway before going inside. The sky was pale gray. Birds were starting up somewhere behind the houses. The street was empty. I looked at the window at the end of the cul-de-sac and raised my hand. I didn't wave fast, just lifted it and held it there. The light went off immediately, not slowly, not dimming. It clicked off, clean and instant, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there longer than I meant to. My arms started to ache. I lowered it and kept staring at the dark window. Nothing else changed. No movement behind the glass. No other lights turned on. Just darkness where the glow had been. That night, when I left for work, the light was already on. Earlier than usual. I checked the time twice. It was only 8:58 p.m. I tried to ignore it after that. I told myself I imagined the timing. I told myself it was coincidence. I focused on work, on sleep, on the routine that kept me stable. But small things started shifting. I noticed my trash cans were being moved. Not much. Just turned a few inches, like someone had nudged them while walking past. I noticed footprints in the thin layer of dust on my porch one afternoon. Not deep enough to tell much, but fresh. I noticed my mailbox door left open twice when I hadn't checked the mail. I installed a cheap camera above my garage. It covered the driveway and part of the street. The footage showed nothing unusual. Cars passed during the day. A mail truck stopped. At night, nothing moved. No people, no animals. The footage never caught the end of the cul-de-sac. The light stayed on. One afternoon, I walked down the street in daylight, something I hadn't done before. I told myself I needed exercise. I told myself it was normal to walk your neighborhood. As I got closer to the house, details came into focus. The yard was trimmed, but uneven. The grass near the foundation was thin. The curtains upstairs were thick and pulled tight. No gaps, no shapes behind them. There were no decorations, no welcome sign, no seasonal items. The mailbox was plain and rusted. The driveway was empty. No tire marks. No oil stains. I stopped at the edge of the property line. The light was on even then, faint but visible through the curtain. I felt exposed standing there, like I was doing something wrong just by looking. I went back home and checked county property records online. The house was owned by a man in his late 60s. No spouse listed. No recent sale. Property taxes paid on time. Utilities active. Everything clean and normal on paper. A week later, I noticed the light turning on earlier again. Not by minutes, by hours. It was on before sunset now. On my days off, it came on while it was still bright outside. That was when I noticed the camera issue. Every night, around the same time, the camera would lose connection for a few minutes. The timestamp jumped. The footage skipped ahead. It always resumed with nothing changed. I checked the logs. Signal interference. Temporary outage. Nothing specific. One morning, after another long shift, I stayed in my car instead of going inside. I parked at the edge of my driveway and watched the house at the end of the street. I waited. At 3:06 a.m., the light went off. At 3:07 a.m., it turned on again. At 3:09 a.m., it went off. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from the camera saying connection restored. The footage resumed at 3:10 a.m. I checked the recorded clip later. The gap covered exactly the minute the light went off and back on. I didn't sleep that day. I spent the afternoon checking everything I could. I reviewed utility data available online. Electric usage at the house was low but consistent. Too consistent. Flat lines. No spikes. No variation between day and night. I drove past the house slowly that evening instead of turning into my driveway. As I passed, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A cable running from the side of the house, buried shallowly under the grass, heading toward the back fence, then disappearing into the trees behind the cul-de-sac. I followed it on foot the next morning. Behind the houses was a narrow strip of woods separating the neighborhood from an access road. The cable led to a small utility shed tucked behind fallen branches. The shed looked newer than everything else. No rust. Fresh padlock. I didn't touch it. I didn't open it. I took pictures and went home. I called the utility company anonymously and asked about the line. They confirmed it wasn't theirs. That night, I parked farther down the street and watched through binoculars. I watched the window. I watched the light. At 2:47 a.m., it was on. At 2:48 a.m., it flickered. For the first time since I moved in, it flickered. At 2:49 a.m., the curtain shifted, just slightly, enough to show the edge of the window frame. There was no room behind it. No furniture. No wall. Just the glow of a mounted light fixed close to the glass. The house wasn't being lived in the way I thought. The upstairs room was empty. The light wasn't for a person. It was a signal. I put everything together slowly. The cable, the shed, the camera interference, the timing. The house sat at the highest point of the cul-de-sac. Clear line of sight down the street. Clear view of every driveway. I contacted the city the next day with everything I had. Code enforcement, zoning, utilities. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. They inspected the property within a week. The shed contained monitoring equipment, wireless repeaters, signal jammers, data storage. The house owner had installed an illegal private surveillance system covering the entire street. The upstairs light was a status indicator. On meant recording active. Off meant maintenance or reset. When I waved, the system detected movement focused on the house. The owner shut it down briefly to avoid drawing attention. When my camera started picking up interference, he increased the jammer output. He had been collecting footage for years. Patterns, routines, work schedules, empty homes. He was arrested quietly. No news trucks, no alerts. The equipment was removed. The cable was dug up. The light never came back on. A month later, a moving truck showed up. The house went up for sale. Normal signs, normal lights. The street felt different after that. Still quiet, but alive again. Porch lights turned on. Dogs barked. Cars came and went. I moved out 3 months later. The rent was still cheap, but now I knew why. I rented the basement apartment because I wanted to disappear for a while. The breakup had been clean on paper and hollow everywhere else. I needed a place where no one knew me and nothing reminded me of who I had been a week earlier. The neighborhood looked perfect. Wide streets, trim lawns, houses set back from the road. The kind of quiet that felt deliberate. The landlord lived upstairs with his family. I liked that. It made the place feel monitored without being watched. The basement unit had one bedroom, a small living area, and a narrow kitchen with low cabinets. The windows sat at ground level, just tall enough to let light in and short enough to remind you that the earth pressed close on the other side. The bedroom window faced the backyard. A tall wooden fence ran along the back edge of the property. On the other side of that fence was another row of houses, or at least that was what the map showed. The fence was old but solid. The boards were thick and close together, weathered to a dull gray. There were no gaps big enough to see through unless you pressed your face close. The first few nights passed without incident. I slept hard. The silence helped. The kind of silence you notice only when you come from noise. The air in the basement stayed cool, even during the day. I worked remotely, kept the lights low, ate simple food, and let time stretch. The sound started on the fourth night. It was around 1 a.m. I was half awake, lying on my side, facing the wall that backed up to the fence. At first I thought it was rain. Then I realized there was no tapping, no drip, no rhythm like water. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, measured. Each step landed with weight, but no drag. No stumble, no rush. Just the soft compression of dirt under a foot. The sound moved along the fence line from left to right. I followed it in my head as it passed the length of the yard. When it reached the area behind my bedroom, it stopped. I waited for it to move again. It didn't. I lay still, listening. After a minute, the steps resumed, continuing to the far corner of the yard, then fading. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same pace, same stop. The pause always lined up with the spot where my bed sat against the wall. I told myself it was an animal, a dog from one of the houses behind us. The fence separated properties, not sound. Animals walked along fences. They paused. They listened. That explanation fit well enough to let me sleep. By the sixth night, the pattern felt too precise. The steps never changed speed. They never overlapped. There was no sniffing, no scratching, no sudden movement. When they stopped cleanly. When they started again, it was as if someone had pressed play. I started staying awake to listen. I turned off the fan and the small white noise machine I used to sleep. I lay flat on my back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The sound arrived right on time. 1 foot, then the other, even spacing. No hesitation. It reached my wall and stopped. I counted seconds in my head. 10, 20, 30, then moved on. During the day, I inspected the fence for my side. The ground along it was bare in places where grass never grew. Hard-packed dirt ran like a narrow path along the boards. I noticed shallow impressions, almost like footprints, but they were too faint to tell anything. The soil was dry. Wind and time erased details quickly. I checked the yard behind the fence from the street. There was an alley that ran between the rows of houses. The houses on the other side looked normal enough from the front. Closed blinds, parked cars, trim hedges. One house stood out because it looked untouched. No car, no trash bins. The lawn was shorter than the rest, but uneven, like it had been cut months ago and left alone. The windows were dusty. I learned later that the house had been empty for years. The landlord mentioned it in passing when I asked about noise from behind the fence. He said it casually, like a fact that didn't matter. A property tied up in probate. No renters, no visitors. That information did not settle anything. The next few nights followed the same pattern. 1 a.m., the steps, the pause, the continuation. I began to feel the pause before it happened, like my body knew when to tense. My breathing slowed on its own. My muscles locked. I stopped swallowing. The silence during that pause felt heavier than the sound itself. On the 9th night, I reached for my phone. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't move my legs. I lifted the phone slowly and turned on the flashlight. The beam was weak but focused. I aimed it at the bottom edge of the window, where the fence slats were closest. The light cut through the narrow gap between two boards. Something moved on the other side. It wasn't fast. It wasn't sudden. It stepped back, away from the fence, as if it had been standing right there. I saw the shift of shadow before I heard anything else. Breathing. It was close enough that I could hear the air pass through the nose. Controlled. Steady. Not labored. Not curious. It sounded like someone regulating their breath on purpose. I froze with the phone still raised. The light shook slightly. I forced my hand still. I listened. The breathing stayed even. No rustle of clothing. No step. Just the sound of a person standing still, inches from the wood. After several seconds, the breathing faded. The steps resumed. Same pace. Same direction. The sound moved away and disappeared to the far end of the fence. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I noticed details I had missed before. The latch on the gate that led from the alley into our backyard was loose. It still closed, but it didn't click. The fence boards near my window were darker at shoulder height, as if touched often. The dirt path was more defined than it had been earlier in the week. I set up my phone to record audio overnight. I placed it near the wall. I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I lay on the couch with the lights off. At 1 a.m., the steps came. I listened from the living area. The sound was clearer there. The stop happened again at the same spot. The breathing returned, faint but present. In the morning, I listened to the recording. The audio picked up the footsteps clearly. It captured the pause. The breathing was there too, a low, steady sound that lasted almost a minute. There were no voices, no animals, no wind. I called a non-emergency line and reported someone entering the yard at night. I gave them the recording. An officer came by in the afternoon. He walked the fence line. He checked the gate. He told me the fence backed up to an alley that anyone could access. He said people sometimes cut through yards. He said there were no signs of forced entry into the empty house behind us. That night, I stayed awake with the lights on. The steps did not come. The following night, I stayed awake again, lights off this time. The steps returned, but they stopped earlier along the fence. They didn't reach my wall. On the third night, there were no steps at all. A week later, the house behind the fence changed. A truck appeared. Workers went in and out. The gate to the alley stayed open during the day. I watched from a window as boards were removed from the fence on that side. One of the workers noticed me watching and nodded without expression. I learned later that a man had been found living inside the empty house. He had entered through a basement window years earlier and never left. He used the alley to come and go at night. He walked the fence line because it let him move without being seen from the street. My window was the only one low enough to offer light from inside at night. The pause lined up with when my bedroom light went off. I moved out 2 days after that. I left most of the furniture behind. I didn't pack slowly. I didn't look back at the fence when I loaded my car. The quiet of that neighborhood had not been empty. It had been watched. I moved to that neighborhood because my job required it. Government contract, temporary assignment, 6 months on paper, maybe longer if the project dragged. They placed me in housing that was new enough to look clean, but unfinished enough to feel forgotten. The area sat on the edge of the city where development had stalled. Concrete houses stood in uneven rows. Some had gates and fresh paint. Others were bare shells with exposed rebar. Empty plots filled the gaps, overgrown with weeds and scattered trash that never seemed to move no matter how strong the wind was. I liked the quiet at first. It felt controlled, predictable. My work days started early, so I kept a strict routine. Wake before dawn, shower, coffee, review notes, leave by 7. I noticed patterns easily because my life had become one. That was how I noticed him. At exactly 6:10 a.m. every morning, he appeared at the far end of the street. He walked alone, average height, thin build, neutral clothes, always the same faded jacket, even on warmer days. He carried a long measuring tape, the kind used for construction sites, metal strip with clear markings. In his other hand was a small notebook and a pen. He moved slowly, not wandering, not lost. He approached each house the same way. He extended the tape across the front boundary, measuring the width of the property. He wrote something down. He adjusted the tape, measured again, then stepped back and moved on. He never looked at the houses as places where people lived. He looked at them like shapes. The first few days, I assumed he was a surveyor. The neighborhood was half-built. It made sense. But But something felt off. There were no vehicles, no safety vest, no visible company name, no clipboard, just him, the tape, and the notebook. He never acknowledged anyone. A woman walking her child passed him once. He did not pause. A car drove by slowly. He did not react. His focus stayed on the measurements. I watched him from my window every morning. Same time, same pace, same process. He measured every house, including ones that were clearly unfinished. Even the empty plots. He stretched the tape across weeds and rubble as if the boundaries still mattered. After 2 weeks, curiosity outweighed comfort. I asked a neighbor about him. The neighbor reacted with confusion. Not concern, just genuine lack of recognition. According to them, no one like that lived there. No construction had been approved recently. No survey work had been announced. That answer stayed with me longer than it should have. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I stood by the window before 6:10. The street was still dim, washed in gray light. At the exact minute, he appeared again. This time, he did not move past my house. He stopped directly in front of my gate. I watched closely. He pulled the tape out and measured the width of the gate. He checked it twice. He wrote longer than usual. Then he measured from the gate to my front door. He walked it step by step, extending the tape across the concrete path. He noted the distance carefully. Then he stood still. He did not look at the house. He did not look at the door. He looked at the numbers he had written. After a moment, he closed the notebook, retracted the tape, and continued down the street as if nothing had changed. I did not leave the house that morning. I reported in sick and stayed inside. I checked the locks twice. I closed the curtains. I felt watched even though the street was empty. That night, at 11:40 p.m., someone tried my front door. It started with a soft click, the sound of metal meeting resistance. Then another, slow, careful. The handle did not rattle. It turned just enough to test the lock, then returned to its resting position. This continued for almost 10 minutes. Whoever was outside did not rush. They did not force the door. They did not knock. They tested. They waited. They tried again. I stood in the hallway with my phone in my hand, light off, breath shallow. I did not call out. I did not move closer. The sound stopped as quietly as it had begun. I did not sleep. The next morning, the man did not appear. Neither did the morning after that. On the third day, 2 unmarked vehicles arrived at the far end of the street just after sunrise. Men stepped out, plain clothes, no uniforms. They went to the empty plot 2 houses down from mine, the one filled with trash and tall weeds. They lifted a loose concrete slab near the edge. Under was a metal hatch. They opened it and disappeared below ground. By the afternoon, the area was sealed off. Temporary barriers went up. No announcements were made. No one explained anything. The men left before evening. I received a call from my supervisor that night. My assignment was ending early. No reason given. I was told to pack and prepare to relocate within 48 hours. Before I left, I did my own research. Public records, old permits, archived development plans. I found references to an underground utility corridor beneath that neighborhood. Planned years ago, never completed. The records stopped abruptly. No follow-up, no closure. I also found a single internal report flagged, but not accessible. Its title mentioned site verification and access measurements. The man with the tape had not been measuring houses for construction. He had been mapping entry points, gate widths, door distances, clearances. He had been identifying which homes provided the easiest access to the underground corridor entrances hidden beneath plots and foundations. My house had been close enough. The lock testing had not been random. It had been confirmation. I moved out without delay. I did not return to that street. Weeks later, I learned the entire development project was quietly canceled. The houses were sold off. The empty plots were fenced permanently. No official explanation was ever released. But the man never returned. My aunt's neighborhood sat on the edge of town, where the houses thinned out and the streets widened. It was one of those places built all at once in the late 80s, then left to age without much attention. The sidewalks were cracked. The curbs were chipped. The yards were clean, but not careful. Snow stayed longer there because the plows reached it last. There was one streetlight that never worked right. It stood near the center of the block, directly across from my aunt's driveway. The pole leaned slightly like it had been hit years ago and never straightened. The light flickered day and night. It buzzed when it was cold. It went dark without warning, then snapped back on seconds or minutes later. Everyone avoided it. Cars parked a house away on either side. No one shoveled directly beneath it. Kids crossed the street rather than walk under it at night. It was not talked about. It was just understood. I was staying with my aunt for a few days after a rough stretch at home. My cousin still lived there. We were close in age and used the killing time together when I visited. That night, snow had been falling since late afternoon. By midnight, it had stopped, leaving everything buried and silent. The air felt heavy. Sound did not carry. We went outside to smoke because my aunt hated the smell inside. We stood at the edge of the driveway, bundled up, breath fogging the air. The only sound was the faint electrical buzz from a streetlight. The light flickered harder than usual. It dimmed, brightened, then went out completely. The street dropped into darkness, so thick it felt physical. Snow absorbed what little light came from the houses. The outlines of parked cars faded. The pole itself disappeared. A second later, we heard something move beneath where the light had been. It was not a step. It was a shift. Weight changing position. Something settling. The sound was low and close to the ground. Wet, like soaked fabric or fur brushing against concrete. It dragged for half a second, then stopped. Neither of us moved. The cold cut deeper when the light was gone. I became aware of my heartbeat, of how loud breathing sounded in the quiet. The light snapped back on. Nothing stood there. The pole was empty. The street was empty. But the snow directly beneath the light was wrong. The smooth surface had been crushed flat in a wide, oval shape. Not footprints, not tracks, just compressed snow, pushed down hard, edges slightly raised. It looked like something had been crouched there, low and wide, pressed into the ground. The snow around it remained untouched. No marks leading toward it. No marks leading away. We did not finish smoking. We went inside without looking back. I barely slept. I kept picturing the shape in the snow. It had been too wide for a person standing. Too low. Whatever had been there was close to the ground, tucked under the light. Morning came gray and dull. The temperature rose just enough to soften the snow. I went outside alone to look again. The flattened patch was still there, but it had changed. The surface was glossy now like ice. The pressure had melted the snow slightly during the night. When the temperature rose, it refroze into a hard, smooth plate. The edges had collapsed inward. Any detail that might have shown texture was gone. There were still no tracks. Later that day, a city truck came down the street. Not a plow, a utility vehicle. Two workers got out and went straight to the flickering light. They opened the access panel near the base. Steam drifted out. I watched from the window. They worked quickly. No conversation I could hear. One of them crouched where the snow had been flattened and brushed away the ice with a gloved hand. He looked at it for a moment longer than seemed necessary. After they left, the light stayed steady for the first time I could remember. That afternoon, I asked my aunt about the streetlight. Not directly about the night, just about why it always flickered. She told me the wiring inside had been damaged years ago. The ballast overheated. It gave off more warmth than it should. People had complained about it, attracting animals in winter. She said the city knew, but never replaced it, because the line fed only that block. That explanation sat with me until evening. I did my own searching online. Old local posts. Archived notices. I found one mention buried in a community board from 3 winters earlier. A man had been found living in the storm drainage access beneath that street. Homeless. Mentally ill. He had used the heat from the light above to stay warm during heavy snow. He would crawl out at night and sit beneath it until morning, then return underground before anyone saw him. The post said he was removed and relocated. No follow-up. That night, after the snow softened and refroze, any tracks he might have left would have vanished. The warmth from the malfunctioning light would have melted the snow beneath him, flattening it under his weight, then sealed it smooth when the power cut and the temperature dropped. The sound we heard had not been fur. It had been a soaked sleeping bag dragging against concrete as he shifted position when the light went out, startled by the sudden cold and darkness. When it came back on, He had already moved, slipping back through the storm access before either of us could see him. After the light was repaired, no one had a reason to sit there again. The street light never flickered after that. People parked beneath it without thinking. Snow fell and stayed smooth. But even now, when I picture that flattened patch beneath the pole, I remember how close something had been, crouched in the dark, using the broken warmth of a neighborhood that never noticed it was there. I moved there because the transfer came with a deadline and no flexibility. 2 weeks notice. New city. Same job, same hours, different building. The duplex was the only place available that didn't require a long lease. It sat on a quiet street lined with similar buildings, all built close together, each split into 2 narrow units. Concrete driveways ran between them, just wide enough for 1 car. Mine shared a driveway with the unit across from me. The first thing I noticed was how close the windows were. My bedroom window faced theirs directly. At night, if both of us had our lamps on, the light filled the space between like a box. There were no curtains in my room when I moved in, just cheap blinds that didn't close all the way. I told myself I'd replace them later. I settled into a routine quickly. Work ended late. I ate simple food, showered, sat on the bed scrolling on my phone until I felt tired. Around 11 each night, the lamp in the window across from me turned off. Every night, no variation. It became part of the rhythm of the place, like a clock. I never saw the neighbor clearly. Just light, then dark. Sometimes movement before the lamp went out. A shape crossing the room. I didn't think much of it. Duplex living meant shared awareness. You notice people without knowing them. One night, a week after I moved in, something fell off. I was sitting on my bed, lights off except for the small lamp by the window. The neighbor's lamp was on, casting a soft yellow glow across the driveway. At exactly 11, the lights switched off, but the glow did not disappear completely. A dark shape remained in the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of contrast. My eyes adjusting. I blinked. The shape stayed. It was tall, narrow, centered in the frame, standing upright, facing me. The blinds in their unit were open. There was no light behind the shape now, just a faint spill from my lamp reflecting off the glass. The silhouette was solid. Still, I felt heat rush to my face, a reflexive embarrassment, like being caught staring. I raised my hand without thinking and gave a small wave, awkward and brief. The silhouette lifted its arm. It waved back. The motion was slow, delayed, not matching my movement, but following it after a pause. The arm rose higher than mine had. The hand stayed raised longer. Then it lowered. I dropped my hand and turned off my lamp. Darkness filled the room. I stood up and closed the blinds fully, fingers shaking enough to fumble the cord. I lay down facing the wall and stared at nothing until sleep came, shallow and broken. The next morning, I told myself I had misread the situation. Light and shadow play tricks. People moved oddly when seen through glass. My brain had filled in gaps. That belief lasted until the afternoon. I was unloading groceries when I noticed the unit across from me again. The driveway was empty. The windows were dusty. A thin layer of grime coated the glass, thick enough to dull reflections. The blinds inside were crooked and uneven, like they had been left half-pulled months ago. Later, while checking my mail, I noticed a small notice taped to the inside of the mailbox cluster. It listed available units. The one across from mine was marked vacant. 3 months. I verified it online. Same result. No tenant. No recent activity. That night, I sat on my bed with the lamp on, staring at the window across from me. The light in that unit never turned on. 11 came and went. The window stayed dark and empty. I slept poorly again. The next evening, I paid closer attention to details I had ignored before. The driveway sloped slightly toward the back, where a wooden gate separated it from a narrow alley. The gate didn't latch properly. It rested against the post, but could be pushed open with little effort. Trash bins lined the alley behind both units. Foot traffic was common enough during the day. At 10:58, I sat on the bed, lamp on, blinds half open. The window across from me remained dark. At 11 exactly, something tapped my window. Not hard, not enough to rattle the glass. Just a light, deliberate contact. Fingertips or knuckles. Once. Pause. Again, I froze. My phone lay on the bed beside me. The lamp hummed quietly. The tapping continued, spaced evenly, as if whoever was doing it had time. I did not look right away. I counted taps instead. 8, 9, 10. I turned my head slowly. Nothing stood in the driveway. No shape, no movement, just empty concrete and darkness. The tapping stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I took time off work and stayed home. I watched the driveway from the living room window. I watched the alley. Nothing unusual happened. Cars passed. People walked dogs. The world behaved normally. In the afternoon, I noticed faint smudges on my bedroom window. 3 spots, close together about shoulder height. They were oily, slightly darker than the surrounding glass. They caught the light when I moved. I cleaned them immediately. That evening, before dark, I walked around the building. The unit across from me had a side door that faced the alley. The lock was intact, but the frame showed wear, as if it had been forced at some point and repaired poorly. The door did not sit flush. I checked public records, police logs, nothing recent, no reports tied to the address. At 10:30, I turned off my lamp and left the room dark. I sat on the bed and waited. At 11, the tapping came again. Same rhythm, same pressure. It went on longer this time. 15 taps, then 20, then silence. I did not turn on the light. Instead, I watched the reflection in glass. My own outline faint against the darkness. Then, behind it, a second shape appeared. Not inside, outside, low at first, then rising as if someone were standing up from a crouch. The shape pressed close to the glass, close enough that the reflection distorted. I stayed still. I kept my breathing slow. After a moment, the shape moved away. I heard soft footsteps on concrete, retreating toward the alley. The next morning, I called the property management office and reported activity at the vacant unit. They sent someone that afternoon. By evening, a temporary lock had been installed on the side door. The gate at the alley was repaired. 2 days later, I learned what had been happening. A man had been using the vacant unit at night. He accessed it through the alley, slipping inside after dark. He stood in the empty bedroom because it was warmest there, insulated by the shared wall. He watched my window because it was directly across from his, lit most nights, predictable. When the light went out, he stayed still, letting his eyes adjust, watching the room beyond. The night I waved, he had been inside the empty unit, standing where the lamp used to cast light when the place was occupied months earlier. My lamp had backlit his shape through the dirty glass. When I waved, he copied the motion after a delay, testing how aware I was. After he learned the unit was being checked more often, he stopped using it. He moved to the alley instead, timing his presence to when he knew I would be awake. The tapping was meant to confirm I was there, that the routine had not changed. He was arrested a week later after being caught entering another vacant property nearby. I moved out before the end of the month. I never used that bedroom again. I slept on the couch until my lease ended. Even now, when I see a window lit across a narrow space, I think about how little distance it takes for someone to learn your habits, and how easily a routine can become an invitation. We moved into that neighborhood when I was 9. It was the kind of place where people stayed for decades. Same cars in the same driveways. Same dogs barking at the same hours. Lawns cut on weekends. Mailboxes with fading names. Nothing ever surprised anyone there, which is why what happened stood out so clearly. The street curved gently and ended in a cul-de-sac bordered by trees. Kids rode bikes without supervision. Adults sat on porches in the evenings. My parents liked it because it felt contained. I liked it because nothing changed. There was one house near the end of the street that never quite fit. It had been built at the same time as the others, but it sat slightly back from the road, its driveway longer and narrower. For as long as I could remember, it was empty. The windows were intact. The paint was fine, but no one lived there. The grass grew wild every summer until someone from the city cut it down. No lights ever turned on. It was just part of the background, like a closed store you stopped noticing. That changed one night in July. I remember because the heat had been heavy all day and my parents had left the windows open after dark. I was lying on the floor with a comic book when my mother noticed light across the street. The empty house had its porch light on. Not dim or flickering, bright and steady. Then more lights came on inside, room by room, as if someone were checking them. There had been no moving truck, no delivery van, no construction noise. The house had simply gone from empty to occupied between one sunset and the next. People noticed immediately. By the following evening, everyone had adjusted their routines just enough to look without staring. Curtains shifted, doors stayed open longer. The man appeared outside just before the sun dropped below the trees. He stood at the edge of the lawn near the sidewalk. He did not lean or pace. He did not check a phone or light a cigarette. He stood with his arms at his sides, feet planted, facing the street. He was tall and thin, wearing the same dark clothes every night. From our porch, his face stayed in shadow. Every evening at sunset, he came out and stood there until the light faded completely. Then he went back inside. The porch light stayed on afterward. No one knew what to make of him. Adults speculated quietly. Kids dared each other to ride past the house on bikes. I did it once and felt his eyes on me the whole time, steady and unblinking. My father waved to him one evening out of habit. He waved to everyone. The man did not respond. He stared back, expression unchanged, eyes fixed forward. Not hostile, not friendly, just present. Weeks passed. The man never missed a sunset. He never changed position. He never acknowledged anyone. The house stayed lit at night, but showed no other signs of life. No trash cans at the curb. No packages. No car. By the end of the month, curiosity overpowered politeness. Someone approached him during the day. Not at sunset. Not while he stood on the lawn. The interaction was brief. The person came back unsettled and told others that the man claimed he had always lived there, that he had not moved in, that the house was his. The next morning, the house was empty again. The lights were off. The porch was bare. No sign the man had ever been there. The door was locked. The windows were dusty again, as if untouched. People gathered quietly. No one went inside. Someone called the city. Records showed the house was still owned by the same developer who had gone bankrupt years earlier. No lease, no sale, no utility account change. The lawn told the rest of the story. Where the man had stood every evening, the grass had died. Not trampled flat, not worn thin, dead in a rough oval, darker than the rest, soil exposed beneath. Over time, the rest of the yard recovered. That spot never did. Each spring, new grass grew around it, but avoided the center, as if the ground itself rejected it. Years later, when I was older and curious in a different way, I learned what had happened. The house had been used briefly during construction by a subcontractor who never left town. He had lived in unfinished homes, moving when they sold, avoiding notice. When the development stalled, that house became his. He slept inside during the day and stood outside at sunset because it was the only time he felt anchored, marking the end of the day the way other people did with dinner or television. He believed the house was his because it had been in practice for years. He had never seen it as abandoned, only in use by others. The spot where he stood had been saturated with chemicals from construction runoff years earlier. Old sealants and solvents had leached into the soil. The grass that was already weak. His weight, standing in the same place every evening, compacted the ground further. When he left, nothing could take root again. The city eventually fenced the yard and later sold the house. A family moved in. They landscaped around the dead patch and placed a bench over it. I drive past sometimes when I visit my parents. The bench is still there. People sit on it without knowing why it was placed exactly there, covering a place where someone once stood every evening, certain he belonged, unnoticed until he wasn't. I was 16 when my parents moved us into that neighborhood. It was one of those fast-growing developments on the edge of town where every house looked the same and half the streets ended in dirt. Fresh siding, new mailboxes, lawns that hadn't grown in yet. At night it felt unfinished, like the place hadn't decided what it was going to be. I didn't know anyone at first. School was across town and most kids already had their groups. Eventually I started hanging out with Chris and Marco because they lived close and they were bored in the same way I was bored. There wasn't much to do. No stores within walking distance. No parks finished yet. no buses running late. So we walked. We walked almost every night, around the new streets, past empty lots filled with weeds and construction trash, past houses where lights were always off because no one had moved in yet. The air smelled like dirt and fresh wood. At night, the sound carried far. Every footstep echoed. At the edge of the development was an older section of town. You could tell the moment you crossed into it. The sidewalk stopped. The mailboxes were different, metal instead of plastic. Some dented, some leaning. The houses sat farther back from the road. Trees were older and closer together. One street had no streetlights at all, just a long stretch of dark road disappearing between houses. People mentioned it sometimes, not as a warning exactly, more like an observation. People didn't walk there. It came up the same way you'd say a road flooded when it rained or a store closed early. It wasn't dramatic, just a fact everyone seemed to accept. That made it worse. We talked about that street a lot. We told ourselves it was nothing, probably just no sidewalks and poor lighting, probably nothing dangerous. Still, we avoided it for weeks. One night, we didn't. It was late summer, warm enough that the air felt thick. The sky was clear, but there was no moon. We crossed from the bright new streets into the older one, and everything changed at once. The road surface felt rougher under our shoes, gravel and cracks. The sound of our steps got dull, like the ground absorbed it. There were no lights, not from poles, not from houses. A few windows glowed faintly behind curtains, but most were dark. The trees blocked what little light came from the sky. It felt like walking into a tunnel. We stayed close together without saying it. Our shoulders almost touched. We kept moving because stopping felt worse. Halfway down the street, I heard something behind us. At first, I thought it was one of us stepping wrong. Then I realized it wasn't matching our rhythm. The sound was heavy, slow, uneven, like one foot dragged a little before lifting. We kept walking. The sound stayed. I could hear breathing mixed in with it. Not loud, but rough, like air being pulled through a narrow space. We stopped. The sound stopped. The quiet after that was worse than the noise. My ears rang. I could hear my own pulse. I waited for something to move, for leaves to rustle or a door to open. Nothing happened. We started walking again. Faster this time. Not running yet. The footsteps behind us started again, exactly when we did. Same distance. Same pace. Still dragging. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to give it that. We sped up more. Our steps got sloppy. Shoes scraping. Breathing hard. The sound behind us didn't change. It didn't rush. It didn't fall back. It stayed close without trying. That was when panic hit. Not sharp. Heavy. The kind that sinks into your chest and makes your arms feel weak. We ran. Our feet hit the road hard. My lungs burned almost immediately. I heard Chris stumble, but he didn't fall. We didn't look back. We just ran toward the faint glow at the end of the street where the new houses started again. The footsteps behind us didn't run. They stayed the same. Still close. Still dragging. Still breathing. That scared me more than if it had chased us. Whatever it was didn't need a hurry. The moment we crossed into the lit area, the sound stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like it hit an invisible line and stayed on the other side. We didn't stop running until we reached the first house with its porch light on. We stood there bent over, gasping, trying not to throw up. I looked back once. The street behind us was empty. Just darkness and trees and the shape of the road. We didn't go back that night. None of us talked much after that. At school the next day, everything felt normal in a way that made the night before feel unreal. Still, it stayed with me. The sound, the pace, the way it never changed. That afternoon, we went back in daylight. It felt different right away. Smaller, less threatening. The street looked older but ordinary. Cracked asphalt, weeds along the shoulder, mailboxes with peeling paint. The trees weren't as close together as they felt at night. We walked to the spot where we had stopped. On the dirt shoulder near the road, there were footprints. They were deep, pressed hard into the ground. Not scattered, not messy. A clear line running parallel to the street. The stride was long but uneven. One print dug in more than the other. They weren't shoe prints. There was no tread, no pattern, just the shape of a foot. Toes visible, heel deep. The ball of the foot pressed flat. The other foot left a longer drag mark behind it, like it didn't lift cleanly. They were big, bigger than mine, bigger than anyone I knew. The prints followed the road. They stopped exactly where the pavement changed to the new development, right at the edge. No marks past that point. We stood there longer than we should have. Later that week, I noticed something else. At the very end of the older street, half hidden behind a line of bushes, was a small house I hadn't paid attention to before. The windows were boarded. The door was intact but damaged near the bottom, like it had been kicked many times. The grass around it was worn down to dirt. I looked it up online. Old property records. News archives. The house used to belong to a man who worked construction before an accident crushed his legs. He never fully recovered. He walked with a severe limp and refused medical help. After his wife died, neighbors reported strange behavior. Walking at night, standing in the road, watching houses. He was arrested years before for breaking into unfinished homes in a nearby development. He never stole anything valuable, just tools, shoes, flashlights, anything useful for moving around at night. He served a short sentence and came back. After that, people stopped walking that street. The house was condemned eventually, but the man wasn't removed. He lived in the back room where the floor was reinforced. He walked barefoot because shoes made it harder for him to balance. He dragged one foot because the nerves never healed. He died the winter after we ran from that street. A neighbor found him collapsed near the road during a snowstorm. We never walked there again. Years later, the older section was torn down. New houses went up. Sidewalks were added. Street lights installed. Kids ride bikes there now. But when I drive past at night, I still remember the sound of footsteps that didn't hurry and didn't fall behind, and how close something can stay without ever touching you. The alley behind our houses ran straight for 3 blocks and connected the back fences like a narrow spine. Every house opened onto it through a small gate or a break in the boards. Trash cans sat there in uneven lines. Cardboard boxes leaned against fences. Old mattresses appeared and disappeared without anyone admitting to owning them. We used the alley constantly because it cut walking time in half, and because it felt private in a way streets never did. During the day, it smelled like sun-warmed plastic and grass clippings. At night, it smelled damp, like old wood and wet soil. The fences on either side were tall and close together, just far enough apart for a car to drive through if needed. Most of the light came from the street at each end. The middle stayed dark. I had lived there long enough to stop thinking about it. The alley was just there. I walked it alone, with friends, carrying groceries, dragging bins. Nothing ever happened. That changed late one night in early fall. I was walking back from a friend's place 2 streets over. It was close to midnight. The air had cooled fast after sunset. I cut into the alley out of habit, hands in my pockets, head down. Halfway through the first block, I heard movement ahead of me. It was fast, too fast to be careful. Whatever it was moved between the fences in short bursts, then stopped, then moved again. It sounded low to the ground, brushing against wood and metal. I slowed, listening. My first thought was a dog. People let them loose sometimes. Dogs ran through alleys chasing smells. Then it changed direction. The sound rose up the fence instead of staying on the ground. Not a jump, not a scramble, a steady climb. Nails or skin sliding against wood. Weight shifting upward. I stopped completely. Ahead of me, about 20 feet away, a hand appeared at the top edge of the fence to my left. Fingers curled over the wood. Long fingers. Pale. The knuckles were sharp under thin skin. The hand flexed as if testing grip. There was no sound of panting, no growl, no bark, just the slow pressure of weight above me. Headlights washed across the far end of the alley as a car passed on street. In that moment of light, the hand vanished. Whatever was there dropped back down on the other side of the fence. I heard it land, heavy and controlled, then move away fast. I stood there until the car was gone and the alley returned to darkness. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. I did not continue forward. I turned around and walked back the way I came, every step deliberate, listening for movement that did not come. The next morning, I went back in daylight. The fence where I had seen the hand was scarred. Deep scratches cut into the wood near the top. Not random. For long grooves, close together, angled downward as if something had dragged its fingers while pulling itself up. The marks were too high for an animal standing on the ground. They were well above my reach. I told myself it had been a person, someone climbing the fence quickly, startled by the car, dropping down before being seen. The fingers had looked long because fear stretches perception. The movement had seemed fast because adrenaline compresses time. That explanation held until I noticed the spacing of the scratches. They were wider apart than a human hand relaxed or clenched. The grooves were deep enough to expose lighter wood beneath, as if pressed with force rather than scraped by nails. Over the next few days, I asked around quietly. No one admitted to seeing anything. No one reported break-ins. The alley stayed quiet. I avoided it anyway. A week later, someone else mentioned the scratches without knowing I'd seen them first. Then another person said they heard movement at night, but thought it was raccoons. Someone else found their trash knocked over repeatedly, lids torn and bent. The city inspected the alley after a complaint about illegal dumping. The inspector noted the fence damage, but did not comment on it. He did mark one house near the center of the block as vacant and unsafe. The back gate hung open. The yard was overgrown. The house had been empty for months after a foreclosure. I paid closer attention after that. At night, when I stepped into my backyard, I listened. I noticed sounds I had ignored before. Light scraping along wood. Thumps from the alley side of fences. Something moving from yard to yard without using gates. One evening, from my kitchen window, I saw the top of the fence behind the vacant house shift slightly, boards flexing inward as if pressure had been applied from the other side. Then nothing. I stopped taking trash out after dark. Others did too. The alley emptied slowly, like a habit breaking. The explanation came weeks later, pieced together from reports and quiet warnings. A man had been living in the vacant house without utilities. He moved through backyards and alleys to avoid being seen on the street. He had modified parts of the fence line near his property, loosening boards, reinforcing others. He climbed instead of walking because height kept him hidden. From the alley, he could move above eye level, crossing from fence to fence. He was unusually tall and thin, malnourished. His hands were large, joints pronounced, nails broken and hardened from constant use. He moved fast because he practiced. He dropped when lights or cars appeared because exposure meant risk. The scratches came from his grip slipping as he shifted weight. The spacing reflected hands stretched wide to distribute load. The depth came from desperation and strength honed by repetition. He was arrested after being seen climbing out of a yard 2 streets over, caught in headlights before he could drop. The report listed trespassing, vandalism, and possession of stolen property taken from sheds and bins. After that, the city repaired the fences. The vacant house was boarded up properly. The alley stayed quiet again. No one used it the same way. We still walk it sometimes, but not at night, and never without watching the fence line above eye level, where fingers once appeared and vanished, reminding us how close something had been, moving just out of sight, using the spaces we stopped noticing. The alley behind our houses ran straight for 3 blocks and connected the back fences like a narrow spine. Every house opened onto it through a small gate or a break in the boards. Trash cans sat there in uneven lines. Cardboard boxes leaned against fences. Old mattresses appeared and disappeared without anyone admitting to owning them. We used the alley constantly because it cut walking time in half and because it felt private in a way streets never did. During the day, it smelled like sun-warmed plastic and grass clippings. At night, it smelled damp like old wood and wet soil. The fences on either side were tall and close together, just far enough apart for a car to drive through if needed. Most of the light came from the street at each end. The middle stayed dark. I had lived there long enough to stop thinking about it. The alley was just there. I walked it alone, with friends, carrying groceries, dragging bins. Nothing ever happened. That changed late one night in early fall. I was walking back from a friend's place 2 streets over. It was close to midnight. The air had cooled fast after sunset. I cut into the alley out of habit, hands in my pockets, head down. Halfway through the first block, I heard movement ahead of me. It was fast, too fast to be careful. Whatever was moved between the fences in short bursts, then stopped, then moved again. It sounded low to the ground, brushing against wood and metal. I slowed, listening. My first thought was a dog. People let them loose sometimes. Dogs ran through alleys chasing smells. Then it changed direction. The sound rose up the fence instead of staying on the ground. Not a jump, not a scramble, a steady climb. Nails or skin sliding against wood. Weight shifting upward. I stopped completely. Ahead of me, about 20 feet away, a hand appeared at the top edge of the fence to my left. Fingers curled over the wood. Long fingers. Pale. The knuckles were sharp under thin skin. The hand flexed as if testing grip. There was no sound of panting. No growl. No bark. Just the slow pressure of weight above me. Headlights washed across the far end of the alley as a car passed on the street. In that moment of light, the hand vanished. Whatever was there dropped back down on the other side of the fence. I heard it land, heavy and controlled, then move away fast. I stood there until the car was gone and the alley returned to darkness. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. I did not continue forward. I turned around and walked back the way I came, every step deliberate, listening for movement that did not come. The next morning, I went back in daylight. The fence where I had seen the hand was scarred. Deep scratches cut into the wood near the top. Not random. For long grooves, close together, angled downward as if something had dragged its fingers while pulling itself up. The marks were too high for an animal standing on the ground. They were well above my reach. I told myself it had been a person. Someone climbing the fence quickly, startled by the car, dropping down before being seen. The fingers had looked long because fear stretches perception. The movement had seemed fast because adrenaline compresses time. That explanation held until I noticed the spacing of the scratches. They were wider apart than a human hand relaxed or clenched. The grooves were deep enough to expose lighter wood beneath, as if pressed with force rather than scraped by nails. Over the next few days, I asked around quietly. No one admitted to seeing anything. No one reported break-ins. The alley stayed quiet. I avoided it anyway. A week later, someone else mentioned the scratches without knowing I had seen them first. Then another person said they heard movement at night, but thought it was raccoons. Someone else found their trash knocked over repeatedly, lids torn and bent. The city inspected the alley after a complaint about illegal dumping. The inspector noted the fence damage, but did not comment on it. He did mark one house near the center of the block as vacant and unsafe. The back gate hung open. The yard was overgrown. The house had been empty for months after a foreclosure. I paid closer attention after that. At night, when I stepped into my backyard, I listened. I noticed sounds I had ignored before. Light scraping along wood. Thumps from the alley side of fences. Something moving from yard to yard without using gates. One evening, from my kitchen window, I saw the top of the fence behind the vacant house shift slightly, boards flexing inward as if pressure had been applied from the other side. Then nothing. I stopped taking trash out after dark. Others did too. The alley emptied slowly, like a habit breaking. The explanation came weeks later, pieced together from reports and quiet warnings. A man had been living in the vacant house without utilities. He moved through backyards and alleys to avoid being seen on the street. He had modified parts of the fence line near his property, loosening boards, reinforcing others. He climbed instead of walking because height kept him hidden. From the alley, he could move above eye level, crossing from fence to fence. He was unusually tall and thin, malnourished. His hands were large, joints pronounced, nails broken and hardened from constant use. He moved fast because he practiced. He dropped when lights or cars appeared because exposure meant risk. The scratches came from his grip slipping as he shifted weight. The spacing reflected hands stretched wide to distribute load. The depth came from desperation and strength honed by repetition. He was arrested after being seen climbing out of a yard 2 streets over, caught in headlights before he could drop. The report listed trespassing, vandalism, and possession of stolen property taken from sheds and bins. After that, the city repaired the fences. The vacant house was boarded up properly. The alley stayed quiet again. No one used it the same way. We still walk it sometimes, but not at night, and never without watching the fence line above eye level, where fingers once appeared and vanished, reminding us how close something had been, moving just out of sight, using the spaces we stopped noticing. I moved into the neighborhood because it felt ordinary, and ordinary was exactly what I needed at the time. The street curved slightly, lined with aging trees that dropped leaves into clean gutters. Most of the houses were older, but cared for. People waved. Some stopped to talk. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad ever made the news. The house across from mine belonged to an older woman who lived alone. She kept her lawn trimmed and her porch swept. She waved every time I left for work. 2 houses down lived a young couple with a dog that barked at passing cars. On weekends, someone always grilled. At night, porch lights came on one by one like a signal that everyone had made it home. That was how it stayed for the first year. Then small things started changing, and I didn't notice right away. The first thing was the internet. One night, my connection dropped. No warning, no slowdown. Just gone. I reset the router. Nothing. I checked my phone. No service issue reported. I went to bed annoyed and dealt with it the next morning. It worked fine after that. A few nights later, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. I noticed because I had been streaming a show and the screen froze. Again, it came back by morning. I blamed the provider. I blamed old wiring. I didn't think much more about it. Then I noticed my porch light was on when I got home from work. I never used it. I preferred keeping the outside dark. I turned it off and moved on. The next day, it was on again. I started locking my doors out of habit, then checking them twice. That feeling crept in slowly, the sense that something was off but not wrong enough to point to. The first real moment of fear came when I found a footprint inside my house. It was faint, just a dusty outline near the back door. I stared at it for a long time, trying to remember if I had stepped there with dirty shoes. The shape didn't match mine. Too narrow, longer toes. I cleaned it up and told myself I was overthinking. After that, I became aware of how much my neighbors could see, the angle of my windows, the way my lights showed through the curtains, how easy it was to know when I was home just by the sound of my car. One evening, I was taking trash out when I noticed the older woman across the street standing on her porch. She wasn't waving this time. She wasn't looking at me either. She was staring past my house, down the street, like she was waiting for something. The next day, her house was empty. Not sold, not for rent, just empty. Her car was gone, her porch clean, her mailbox overflowing. No one mentioned it. A week later, the couple with the dog moved out. The dog didn't bark as they left. It wasn't in the car. By then, the internet outages were happening every night. Always after midnight. Always back by morning. I started leaving my laptop open to see what happened when the connection dropped. That's when I noticed something strange. Even when my internet went out, my router light stayed active. Not normal activity either. Heavy data transfer. Uploads, not downloads. I changed my Wi-Fi password. That night, the porch light came on again. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of my back door handle moving. Slowly, carefully, I lay completely still listening. The handle turned once, then stopped. I heard footsteps on the deck, moving away. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I checked my router logs. There was a device connected to my network that wasn't mine. It had a generic name, something that looked like a printer or smart appliance. The connection history showed it had been active for weeks. I unplugged everything. That afternoon, I saw a man standing in my driveway when I came home. He wasn't touching anything, just standing near my car, looking at my house like he was measuring it. He looked normal, clean clothes, nothing threatening. He walked away before I could react. I installed cameras that night. The footage showed things I wish I hadn't seen. Every night, after my internet dropped, someone moved through my yard. Sometimes they approached the house. Sometimes they stood just outside the camera's edge, close enough that I could hear faint movement, but not see them clearly. They never rushed. They knew when the cameras were active and when they weren't. One night, I watched footage of someone standing directly under my bedroom window for almost an hour, just standing. The next morning, I found my crawl space covers slightly open. I called the police. They came, looked around, took notes. Nothing was stolen. No forced entry. No crime. I felt stupid after they left. Then I found the notebook. It was hidden under my house, wrapped in plastic. Pages filled with handwritten notes. My schedule, my habits. When I showered, when I slept, when I left lights on. Other addresses were listed too. Some crossed out, some marked with dates. The crossed-out ones matched the houses where people had moved away. I learned later that a group had been targeting quiet neighborhoods like mine. They didn't break in right away. They monitored. They learned routines. They accessed home networks, cameras, smart devices. They used one house as a hub, the empty one across the street. The woman hadn't moved. She had left after discovering someone had been using her home without her knowledge. I wasn't the first. Once enough houses were compromised, they started entering them one by one. Not to steal at first, just to test boundaries. Fear did the rest. People left on their own. By the time arrests were made, half the street was empty. I moved before they finished. I don't live in a smart home anymore. I don't trust silence. And when my internet drops now, even for a second, I check every lock. Because I learned the hard way that some neighbors don't need to knock to know everything about you.